Welcome to the 11:30 session powered by siberX. Today we'll be talking about contact tracing and privacy issues by none other than Miss Privacy herself, Dr. Ann Cavoukian. Now, Dr. Ann Cavoukian recently was awarded the Canadian Women in Cybersecurity Lifetime Achievement Award from siberX. She is the former three-term Information and Privacy Commissioner for the province of Ontario in Canada. She created the concept of privacy by design. She is now the Executive Director of Global Privacy and Security by Design Center. Now, after finishing all of this, I feel like taking this mic here and just dropping it because, wow, it's an honor and a privilege to present to you today live with Dr. Ann Cavoukian as she'll be discussing COVID-19 and the vital need to avoid tracking and surveillance, preserving privacy and freedom. Dr. Ann Cavoukian, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
I want to start off and just kind of take this back to, step one. What is privacy?
Privacy is everything. Privacy is not about having something to hide. It drives me crazy when people say that. If you have nothing to hide, what's the problem with having the state access all your information? The problem is that that's not what freedom is about. I mean, that having nothing to hide, that could have been the motto of the Stasi police and the Third Reich, because it presumes that the state has a right of access to all your information if you're a law-abiding citizen. Nonsense. That's the opposite of freedom. Freedom is everything, and privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. That's why it's so critical. And privacy, I always say, look, privacy is not a religion. You want to give away all your information? Be my guest, as long as you make the decision to do that. Privacy is all about control. It's about personal control relating to the uses of your personal information. And that kind of freedom of choice is so important. The Germans actually have an amazing term called informational self-determination that they developed years ago. And I'll describe it in a moment. It's a big term, very simple concept. But it's no accident that Germany is the leading privacy and data protection country in the world. It's no accident they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich and all the horrors of having their privacy stripped. And when that ended, they said, never again. Never again will we allow the state to strip us of our privacy and our freedom. And literally, they stand up to that. During my 3 terms as privacy commissioner, I went to a number of conferences in Germany. Every conference was started with a reference to that time, lest we forget. We cannot forget the mistakes of the past, and we have to ensure that we continue to move forward, preserving our privacy and our freedom. So the term they created, informational self-determination, it's all about how the individual should be the one to determine the fate of his or her personal information, that concept of personal control. And the reason it's so important is because, you see, context is key in terms of privacy. What may be really important to me may mean nothing to you, and vice versa. And I always give the example, I use myself because I'm a public figure and everybody knows my life, and that was by choice. Health information is the most sensitive personal information out there, should be strongly protected. The strongest protections possible should be afforded to health information. I have spoken publicly over the years about my health conditions in an effort to help others who may be going through the same thing. But I always give that example. I've had a lot of neurosurgery, brain surgery, like 5 of them. Touch wood, I'm good. I've been good for a long time. But it would have affected me enormously had it gotten into the wrong hands. At the beginning, the first time I applied for the position of privacy commissioner, I went through the interviews. Everybody said, fine, this is great. She's going to get the job. But then before giving me the job, the office called the EA of the former commissioner who was working with me. And they asked her, do you think Dr. Cavoukian's okay? Do you think she's up for the job? Now, fortunately, she liked me and said, oh yeah, she's been plugging away for a long time. But if she didn't like me, or I didn't know about the conversation, it could have gone another way. It could have simply been, she could have said, nah, you know, she's not the same. She can't do the same work. She could have said something to her quietly. I would never have known about it. And I would never have become commissioner. It would have affected my entire life. So little pieces of information like that in the wrong hands, used for unintended purposes, can come back to bite you in the biggest way. And when we get to COVID, I want you to remember that, because COVID-19, if you're COVID-19 positive, for example, very, very sensitive information. You don't want that information in anybody's hands other than the healthcare practitioner who's helping you or whatever, because it could come back to haunt you. Just like my neurosurgery could have come back to haunt me if I had not been made aware of that conversation. And if it didn't go in the proper direction, hopefully in my direction, I would never have known about that. And just like that COVID-19, you have to know who is given this information, who will gain access to it in the future, what kind of surveillance and tracking is taking place. We'll return to that in a moment. Back to privacy and context being so key. So as I said, you want to give your information away? Be my guest. Privacy is not a religion. It's up to you. The choice has to rely with you. And you see, privacy promotes freedom and innovation, societal prosperity. These are things people don't understand, because it allows you to have the crazy blue sky thinking that you might not have had otherwise if you're worried that someone is listening to your information or accessing it. I always like to give the story of Steve Jobs, who I just love, the founder of Apple. He used to have a white Mercedes that he would buy every 6 months, less a day. He would take it in to the dealership, buy another new one, and go and drive that off for 6 months, less a day. Why was he doing this? Because he didn't want to be tracked. At that time in California, you were given up to 6 months to get a license plate when you bought a new vehicle. So he took it in, 6 months less a day, bought a new one, and on it went. He didn't want to be tracked. He was so interested in privacy and his ideas staying with him. Unfortunately, after he died, they changed the law. So you have to get a new license plate right away. But it just gives you an idea. See, you have to have crazy blue sky thinking without encumbrance, without worrying about who's doing what, looking over your shoulder. If you don't have that and surveillance is taking place, what surveillance does is it shrinks your cognitive bandwidth. Sorry, I use that language. I'm a psychologist. That's my background. And by shrinking your cognitive bandwidth, it means you're going inward. You're looking over your shoulder. You're worried about who's going to access your information. It does the opposite of breeding creativity and prosperity and innovation, which privacy fuels again and again. Let me just tell you about privacy by design, and then I'm going to go to COVID. I created privacy by design very early on in my first term as commissioner, because you see, my approach to privacy was very different from the approach taken by lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. As I said, I'm a psychologist. And I wanted, of course, regulatory compliance is very important. The laws you have in place that kick in after the privacy harms from arisen, draw for appropriate remedy to alleviate the harms. I wanted to prevent the harms. I wanted like a medical model of prevention, where you have a proactive means of identifying the privacy concerns and embedding privacy protective measures directly into your operations, into your policies, into your code, bake it into the code so that you could prevent the privacy harms from arising, not just offering remedies after the fact. And so that's why I created privacy by design literally at my kitchen table over 3 nights. And I took it into the office and presented it to my office, which was largely consisted of lawyers and legal staff. And I'm telling you, it was very different from what they were used to. And I'm not going to say that they embraced it right at the beginning, but slowly over time, it grew, because I made it clear I didn't intend privacy by design to eradicate regulatory compliance. No, not at all. I wanted it to complement privacy laws, which kick in after the fact. Let's try to prevent as many of the harms as we can, and those that we can't prevent will be addressed through privacy laws. So I was delighted that it grew. In 2010, it was unanimously passed as an international standard by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. And since then, it's been translated into 40 languages. It's followed all around the world, and it just takes off. The 2 essentials to privacy by design: be proactive, prevent the harms from arising. And the second one, banish zero-sum models. And this is relevant to COVID. Zero-sum means you can only have a positive gain in one area, public safety, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, so that the two total to a sum of zero. Forget that either or win-lose model. It's so detrimental because it's never privacy that wins over the other interest, nor am I suggesting it should be, but I'm sure as hell not going to let it lose out all the time to other interests because you don't need to. You can do both. You can have privacy and security, privacy and business interests, privacy and public safety. Make it a positive sum, win-win proposition with multiple positive gains. That's essential to privacy by design. So this is what I've been modeling for many years, and it's taken off. Mahdi, it's taken off so much. As I said, 40 languages. When I was commissioner, not a week would go by when I wouldn't hear from some jurisdiction as to what they were doing to protect privacy and how successful it was. I mean, it just took off. And the beauty of it, we offer privacy by design certification now with KPMG. And the reason we do that is because once you are certified for privacy by design, it takes off. It builds such customer trust. It builds trusted business relationships. And right now, there's such a trust deficit. So advanced companies like TELUS, one of our major telcos in Canada, have become certified for privacy by design in a number of areas. And it works in their interest because you gain a competitive advantage by respecting your customer's privacy and showing that you can have privacy and your business interests. You can do both. You must do both. And what I want to do in terms of COVID, let's keep this in mind. The way it's been presented thus far by governments is, look, you got to give up your privacy because you need public safety. Of course you need public safety. And with the level of heightened fear that is out there right now, everyone is terrified that they're going to get COVID-19. And of course, they want to protect themselves and their family. So they're saying, well, I guess if we have to give up privacy, we don't want to, but so be it, because we have to preserve our health. Of course you do, but you do not have to give up your privacy to do that. That's the message I want to convey big time. You see, I'm going to talk about some of the contact tracing apps that are being developed now.
Yeah,
and we're going to talk extensively about that. If you have a good contact tracing app, and I will refer you to one, it doesn't give up on privacy. It allows you to identify if you've been exposed to someone who's COVID-19 positive, but you don't want one that engages in collecting your personal information and tracing your activities and tracking and surveillance. That's the last thing you want. Alberta, they went the wrong direction in doing that. Australia went the wrong direction in doing that, and they're changing that. Australia is now moving to, and let me introduce, the Apple-Google framework. It's amazing. Apple and Google have partnered together, which is a first in itself. Obviously, that's very unusual. Why did they do it? Because they want to help the public, because the majority of the mobile devices out there are either iPhones or Android. So they work together to produce an API that they make freely available to public health authorities. So public health authorities can develop an app that is unbelievably privacy protective, because the Apple Google framework, no personal information is collected whatsoever. No names, nothing. Any location data, nothing is collected whatsoever. In fact, they have banned public health authorities from collecting location data, just outright. The way it works, and the beauty of it is, Apple, Google didn't call it a contact tracing app. They're calling it an exposure notification app. Because if you voluntarily choose to download this app, then it will alert you to whether you've been exposed to someone who has self-reported as being COVID-19 positive. And it does this in a brilliant, brilliant way. It only uses proximity. It's a proximity-only app based on Bluetooth, which is far more privacy preserving than apps that use location data. So that's the first thing. And also, individuals who self-report, they have to self-identify themselves as being COVID-19 positive for use in this app. Their data is completely protected. There's nothing that collects their personal information, their personal identifiers, their name, their location, nothing. So completely privacy protected, and as is the individuals who choose to use this. And you see, one of the reasons this is so important and why public health authorities have to preserve this level of privacy is because there's such a trust deficit now. Nobody trusts private sector or government. There's just no trust. And so if you want the public to use these apps, and they have to use the apps, if we're going to get any kind of widespread movement on this, I think they say something like 40 to 60% of the public have to use the apps to make them useful. No one's going to use the app if they don't trust it. If they think it's collecting their personal information, forget it. Yeah. No one's going to do it. And that will be a failure for everyone, including public health authorities. And the other thing I want to make clear, public health authorities, this Apple Google framework, it works in conjunction with the very valuable work that public health authorities already do in terms of manual tracing. People who come to them and they're COVID-19 positive, seeking help and treatment. Public health authorities will say, of course, we're going to help you and do whatever we can. Please advise us who you've been in contact with so we can alert them manually to come in and also get tested. So the Apple Google API will complement this type of manual tracing that will continue as it has continued for years and years and is extremely valuable. I don't want to suggest otherwise, not for a minute, but it's the other thing I want to refer you to, just so you don't think it's just me, who's obviously wild.
I could do this all day.
300 brilliant academics and epidemiologists from all around the world got together, wrote an open letter to governments all around the world saying, if you do not protect privacy in whatever digital app you create, it will fail in terms of contact tracing. I'm just going to read just from a little bit from their letter. Digital contact tracing will fail unless governments build the technology in a way that strongly respects user privacy, a group of 300 experts warned. If public health bodies build centralized contact tracing apps that transmit superfluous data, they will struggle to win the trust of enough citizens to ensure the activity is successful. It will not be successful, it will fail. Such apps can otherwise be repurposed to enable unwarranted discrimination and surveillance, the letter states. Isn't that amazing? It is vital that in coming out of the current crisis, we do not create a tool that enables large-scale data collection on the population, either now or later. I mean, it's brilliant. They did this on their own. Right. It just brought tears to my eyes. They understand you have to do this strongly, properly protecting privacy, because you see, people care deeply about their privacy. In the last 2 years, I have never seen concern for privacy as high as it has been in all the public opinion polls, Pew Research, etc. It's coming at the 90 percentile. 90% of the population very concerned about their privacy. 92% concerned about loss of control over their personal information. And so they're just not using any of these things that don't protect their privacy. And so we must, in this area, insist upon this, just as these 300 experts have insisted. This was about a month and a half ago. A few weeks ago, a second letter was written by 170 experts and epidemiologists in the UK, telling the British government, you have to cease and desist because it's not going to work and you're just going to create lots of loss on the part of the public. So a second open letter. That's amazing. And that's what I find, that it's not just privacy people who are raising these flags. It's people in the medical field, epidemiologists, experts from all around the world. And what I want to remind people of, 9/11. After 9/11, huge terrorist attack, of course. And it was a horrendous experience, obviously. We were all going crazy. And of course, wanting to help in any way that we can. But after 9/11 ended, the massive surveillance measures that had been introduced during 9/11, they continued to this day. Yeah. In the United States, you had The Patriot Act, which just got renewed like last week, again, with warrantless surveillance. You know, I always say when I was commissioner to police and law enforcement, I worked very closely with them. I said, look, if you have a probable cause that a crime has been committed, or maybe, go to the judge, get a warrant. It's not difficult to get a warrant. Then by all means, be my guest. But you have to do that. You can't just go out and collect whatever information you want. And these are the concerns that we have to identify. So the Patriot Act continues. Department of Homeland Security was created at that time, which continues. So much surveillance. So with the COVID-19 pandemic now, the reason governments are able now to collect more information, health information, than they ever were allowed to do before under privacy laws, is because all privacy laws have, you know, emergency powers that can be enacted in cases of emergency, such as COVID. And so under those laws, under those provisions, the privacy law goes out the window, and they're collecting additional information. The problem is, what is required is clear sunset clauses. We can only collect this information until this firm end date, and all the information collected thus far will be deleted automatically. Well, where are the sunset clauses? I mean, you can always revisit it if you need additional time afterwards. You can extend it, but you must have sunset clauses with firm end dates. We don't, and that's the problem. That the surveillance engaged in now could well continue after the pandemic ends, and the pandemic will end. These things come to an end. What cannot come to an end is our privacy and our freedom. Yep. And that's the concern. So Mahdi, sorry, I'm doing all the talking.
No. I mean, and there's a couple of questions that have been coming in that are relevant to what you're talking about right now. So one of the questions we have here is, what is your take on the right to forget in the context of privacy, which we were just talking about right now?
I think everyone should have a right to forget. It's referred to in the UK, in the GDPR, the right to be forgotten. You know, we all do things, you know, when you're a kid, you might have to engage in certain activities which you would prefer not continue to be reminded of. I believe in the right to be forgotten. Now, that doesn't extend to everything. If you've been convicted of a crime, there's a permanent record of that. Of or, you know, there are certain activities.
So certain things, yeah. Now, here's another thing, yeah.
No, but generally speaking, I believe in the right to be forgotten.
Okay, and you know, and this is a question I know for myself and a lot of people that knew that I was going to get on this call with you today, you know, asked me this question, and that is, in a summary, you know, in a couple of sentences, what can we do to protect ourselves?
You know, I'm going to give you a few pointers, but I want to make it clear. We cannot take the pressure off of either governments or private sector entities. They are the ones who should be responsible for protecting your privacy when they are trying to collect your personal information. They should only do so with a clear understanding on your part of what is the primary purpose of the data collection. You should be asked for your positive consent to agree to it, and then that information should only be used for that primary purpose. We know that doesn't happen very often. And that's why I always tell organizations, you should have a data map, a map that clearly delineates the flow of personal information that may be collected legitimately for one purpose, but then it gravitates throughout your entire operation. It can be used for secondary purposes that were not intended. It's just so if you can flow the navigation of how the information goes throughout your organization, you're way ahead. So I'm not taking the heat off of companies and governments to protect data. But what you can do is provide the least amount of data that is required to fulfill whatever you want to complete. So if you want to order something online, they need your home address and they need your credit card number and things of that nature. But you should make it clear to whoever you're making a purchase from or whatever you're engaged in online, I am only giving you this information for the intent of having it delivered to my home and you receiving payment for it. End of story. You do not have my consent to use it for any other purposes. Always start by declaring that. And the same thing online. I go into or offline into just regular stores, and they collect my information. Sometimes they ask for my postal code or something. And I say, oh, and what will you be using that for? I really want the strongest privacy possible. Can you tell me if you're going to have any secondary uses of the data? Now, the poor clerk, will have no idea what I'm talking about,
Right.
but they'll go get the manager. And when the manager comes, they'll see I care about privacy. And they say, oh, you care about privacy. Oh, we can do this, this, and this. They offer then additional measures. That's the kind of conversation you want to engage in. The other thing, you can use VPNs. You can encrypt your data if you're into encryption. You can, social media. I know people use social media. If you have to use it, and I understand why you're using it. I use Twitter. I tweet every day, but I do it because I want to convey the privacy stories of the day. But if you're on Facebook or something, they actually do have strong privacy protective measures you can invoke, but you got to dig in and find them. Facebook told me they do privacy by design. Huh, who knew? I'd love it if someone would try to find privacy by design on Facebook and tell me about it. Because apparently if you engage in it, your information, your social media information will be strongly protected. So look through all the measures and don't just click on agree. I know it's a pain when you're going to something, you want to get some information, you got to agree to all these cookies and all these other things. If you can try not to do that routinely, and at the very least, if for nothing else, indicate you care deeply about your privacy and you expect your information to be used for no other purpose other than the intended primary purpose. I find just adding that alerts them on the other side, oh, this is someone who cares deeply about their privacy. Let's add these protective measures to help them.
Yeah, and I'm getting several questions here asking a question about, you mentioned how Google, Apple want to help people by, joining forces for the first time, ever. And this is only because of this digital transformation and because of what's happening in the world that you would see two giants like that join together. The question is, do they really want to help, or do they want to help their bottom line?
My answer to that is they really want to help. And you can be skeptical about that. Apple has briefed me on 2 occasions behind the scenes to walk me through everything that they're doing. The lengths they've gone to protect your personal information, unprecedented. And you see, I always say trust but verify. I always look under the hood to make sure that what they're saying is actually what they're doing. And the measures they've engaged in are remarkable. And so you can be skeptical, it's up to you, but they didn't have to do this. And I applaud them for doing it because this will help the public enormously. Because I don't believe that other contact tracing apps have the strength of an Apple Google framework. And I am confident that people and governments that engage the Apple Google framework will benefit enormously, and they will have trust. And they're using, I'm said to be a trusted figure in the privacy field. So the fact that I am supporting it this strongly, I mean, I have nothing to gain by this. I don't work for them. I just always look under the hood. You have to trust but verify, and we've done that.
Now, it's May 28th, 11:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the world has shut down, or a portion of it is starting to open up. With respect to contact tracing, and I'm sure you're looking at what other countries are doing around the world, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, Europe.
China.
China. I mean, I have friends right now in Saudi Arabia, they can't leave their home without sending a message to the government saying, am I allowed to leave for 4 hours? Where do you think we are headed as Canadians?
We have to insist upon privacy and freedom in Canada and the United States, but we have to insist upon this. See, Canadians represent so many different national backgrounds. I'm Armenian. There are all kinds of wonderful different nationalities here. And we're here because we value the enormous freedoms that we have and the rights, the fundamental human rights that we, excuse me, that we enjoy here in Canada. And we value that enormously. I fear that we take that largely for granted.
Yes,
so that's the only thing. I ask all of you as Canadians, let your governments know how deeply you care about preserving your privacy and your freedom. To me, it's all about freedom. And we can't lose our perspective in terms of what's happened historically. You know, I gave the example in Germany, you know, lest we forget, constantly being reminded of what could happen and what we can never allow to happen again.
Yeah.
So in my tweets, when I get responses back that say, lady, you know, give it up, privacy's dead, forget it. Yes, it's hard to preserve our privacy. I'm not suggesting this is easy, but you don't simply give up on something just because the odds of it are difficult. No, we can't. I don't know if we have time for a personal story.
We do. Go ahead. I mean, we'll make
Very
time.
quickly, because I know we have questions and I want to take
We do, yeah.
As I said, I'm Armenian. My background, my grandparents were amazing. 1915, the Armenian genocide, they were there. They were about to be killed the next day. They were in the prison camps. This is my grandmother telling me this. My grandmothers raised me. They had tattooed on their forearms their prison numbers from the prison camps. And talk about concern for privacy. My grandma used to say, we have to be so careful not to say anything good about the Armenians, because if the guards heard us, they killed you right on the spot, saying anything positive about Armenians. So they were going to be killed the next day. My grandfather thinking, what can I do to save my family? I mean, he was an artist, a brilliant painter. You're thinking, what good is that? So my grandma said he always used to carry parchment paper and charcoal with him because he loved to etch. And she said during that night, when everyone was asleep, she had a candle which she lit, and my grandfather, through memory, etched a portrait of the general who he had seen, General Pasha, earlier in the day, thinking who knows what, but that's all he knows how to do. And he does that, and in the morning he wraps it up, and he gives it to the guard. They're leading up to be killed, and he says to the guard, please give this to General Pasha with my regards. And the guard says, stupid man, what's he going to want with this? Don't be stupid. And my grandpa thought he threw it away, and he thought that was it. They're leading them out to be killed. And this is my father was a 3-year-old, one of their children, 3 years old. They're about to be killed on horseback at breakneck speed. Is coming the general, and he's waving around the parchment paper. And he says, who did this? I want to know who did this. And my grandfather says, Efendi, that's sir in Turkish, I did it. He said, I like it very much. You and your family, you're free to go. That saved their lives. What are the odds of that? To anyone who said, you know, the odds are not looking good at saving anything, protecting privacy. What are the odds of you saving your family's life in a situation like that? Being an artist, for God's sakes. That's why you never give up. You never, ever give up. My family, freedom is more important than anything. My family eventually moved to Cairo, Egypt, which is where I was born. And my mother told me that when it was under British rule, there was enormous freedom. Everybody enjoyed. We had an Armenian church and everybody got along. The Jews with the Arabs, with the Christians, there was harmony. The British pulled out in the late 50s. Abdel Nasser came in. Everything changed overnight. There was no freedom. The banks were nationalized. You couldn't take your money out. My father, who was a portrait photographer, he was appointed as the official photographer for Nasser. He had no freedom whatsoever. This, to my parents, was like death. So literally, the way they escaped, in the dead of the night, my grandma told my mother, my 2 grandmothers, they told me, we had 8 suitcases, 3 children, and 2 grandmothers. And they literally just escaped. And they came to Canada, and we lived in a friend's basement for 6 months until my father got his business up and running. They did this for our freedom. My parents could continue to have a charmed life there. They had everything they wanted, but they didn't have freedom when Nasser came in. That was so unacceptable. They gave up everything. They couldn't take their money out, nothing, so that they could raise their children in freedom. Now, I was 4 years old when I got here, so I didn't appreciate any of that at the time, and I'm sure I drove my parents crazy. But boy, do I appreciate it now and value my parents, my grandparents, value freedom. And privacy is essential for freedom.
And I've wanted to ask you this the first time I ever met you. I never got an opportunity. You know, we got hundreds of people on Zoom that have called in or dialed in or WhatsApp, you know, in, and then we also have several hundreds of people on our platform as well. What drives your passion for privacy? I mean, I know you told me the story that your grandmother told you, and you were very young at that point, and I'm sure it resonates with you. But what is that moment that you can trace back to that goes, you know what? This was that moment that drove me to the passion that we can all feel today, right now, from you.
My grandmothers were amazing. And the stories they told me in terms of how easily they could have been killed, because they did used to speak Armenian and utter, say nice things about other people. And they said, if we had not been more careful, we would have been killed right then and there, because we uttered something that was not intended for other parties to hear, but was heard by the guards, and that led to our death. That's an extreme example. I'm not suggesting that surveillance is going to lead to people's deaths, hopefully, but surveillance and accessing information like health information, COVID-19 information, that was never intended for any purpose other than one's treatment and care, in the wrong hands, this could jeopardize your future. It could jeopardize you getting a job. I mean, jobs are implicated by things like that. So my passion is driven largely by my history, my background, but also the reality of what it can do to you and how harmful it can be. I always tell people, you have to be aware of the unintended consequences of data collected for one purpose and used for another. That's why we talked about privacy is about primary purpose in terms of the data collection, that you get positive consent for the primary purpose, and it's only intended to be used for that single purpose. These days, it's used widely and goes beyond that. That's why I urge companies and governments to create these data maps just to be able to navigate the flow of information and obtain additional consents when needed. These are the critical features.
Yeah, and we all know that data is the most valuable item in the world. And I think we're now headed into an area of health data, which is the most valuable. And we've seen movies and, different articles on how valuable it is to obtain someone's health data. What are some of the breaches that you're seeing that are more common during this COVID-19 time? And who do you think is accountable or should be held accountable for those breaches, whether it's contact tracing or anything else, or especially in Canada?
Under emergency powers, which the pandemic represents, governments are permitted to collect additional information than they would be allowed to under privacy laws, existing privacy laws. And we have very strong laws in Canada. In Ontario, we also have PHIPA, the Personal Health Information Protection Act, which strongly protects your health information. It's amazing. Under emergency powers, those protections are lifted. So my concern is people who have tested positive for COVID-19, where does that information reside? How widely has it been transmitted to parties that I'm sure collecting it, the primary purpose is for your own good and they want to help you. I don't doubt the motivation, but where does it reside once the help has been given? See, it's a matter of where these records are retained and how widely they may have been disclosed, always in the intention of helping you. But you don't know how far that goes. And depending on how far it goes, and I'm guessing it will not be deleted. This is the problem. If it's not used for health-related purposes immediately, it should be deleted after the pandemic. But that means someone has to have kept a good record of what was shared, with whom, with other departments, and then go back and make sure it's securely deleted. Should we bet on this if the governments are doing that? I'm guessing they're probably not. And that's what concerns me with governments. And we need to ensure the strongest privacy protection possible. And so I would be glad to work with the government to review all of these things and make sure that the strongest protections are possible, and any contact tracing apps that are considered have to be, in my view, ideally based on the Apple-Google framework.
Now, a lot of us, are dealing with this new world where we have kids at home, and all our kids are now jumping in, on different websites and platforms, whether it's Zoom for school or Google Classroom or what have you. What can we teach our children with respect to privacy or the importance of privacy? What are some of the tidbits of information that you can help to some of the folks that are on here and how to deal with children?
And, it's interesting, before I get to the children's stage, people just assume that kids these days, aged 18 to 30 whatever, that they don't care about privacy. It's nonsense. There's been amazing research done at New York University and other places. Dana Boyd has been following this research. She's created the research, and she shows that especially young kids aged 18 to 24 care deeply about privacy, and they're born digital. They know how to protect their privacy better than anybody else in terms of digital protections. What I would say to parents with very young children, it's hard getting the concept of privacy out, but I always say, use an example of something your child cares deeply about, whatever it may be, and that is very sensitive to them. And would you want others knowing that without you choosing to share it? And I've had this conversation with children go, oh, no, I don't want anyone else to do it. That's my info. So everyone has something like that. So I always say to parents, find something like that is very sensitive to your child and make it clear to her, you're not going to ever share that information, but you also want her to understand that some of the information she may be imparting digitally, everybody's born digital these days, everybody's online, that it may accidentally get the information out. So you have to be very careful when you're online, sweetheart, to not put any information that might lead to that kind of sensitive stuff getting out there. Kids get it. And they obviously don't share the same privacy concerns we do as adults. They don't have monetary concerns or job related, but they have other very sensitive areas that they're concerned about. So just find that and talk to them about it. And also talk to them about how important it is to also protect their friends' privacy. If their friends have shared a secret with them or something very sensitive, it's also very important to be very respectful of their friends' privacy in the same way that they expect their privacy to be respected.
Thank you. We have about 3 minutes left, and to the folks that are in direct from Zoom, we do also have our Feed Loop app, our virtual portal, which you can access for the rest of the event. And also there's information to get in touch with Dr. Cavoukian, or social medias or emails or anything to that effect. And I just looked at a report here, and we have people from all over the world on today. With about 2 minutes left, I will give you the last 2 minutes here. You have the mic to just speak to the world and say your closing statements here.
I'm so delighted to have such a wonderful audience. And wherever you are in the world, especially if you're in an area that is engaging in surveillance in terms of collecting your information. I give one example, China's social credit system. They have social credit scores on everybody. You jaywalk and your score goes down, and silly things like that. The reason I raise that is the kind of concern that can cause you is unbelievable. I read this story a few weeks ago. This brilliant Chinese student was just graduating from high school. He had A+ in everything, brilliant. He applied to universities in China. He was denied entry into any university. Why? Because of his parents' social credit scores. His parents' scores, my God, punished the child who is brilliant. And that's considered fair? That's considered smart? Oh my God, it just caused me such distress. And this is one of the reasons why surveillance is just so outrageous in my view, because it puts things in the wrong context. It collects information for governments in ways that were never intended. So please value your privacy, protect it, ask others to protect it, online and offline. I mentioned a couple of things I do when I go to stores, but definitely do it online. Every time you purchase something or place an order, just add a sentence. I care deeply about my privacy. I don't expect this information to be used for any purposes other than to complete this engagement. Just adding those small measures will make a big difference in strengthening your privacy. And I just remind you that privacy forms the foundation of our freedom, and nothing is more important than our freedom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Perfect timing. On behalf of the siberX team, want to thank you for your time. And as always, this conversation was a true eye-opener. Thank you again, and we're very humbled and grateful to have you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.